Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello, and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of audio commentaries dedicated to discussing cinema that fascinates us in a way we hope fascinates you. We're your co-hosts, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
I'm Levi.
And here we are for our very third episode. Who knew that it's crazy to think that it's only been a month about since we've had this basic kernel of idea, and here we are already recording the
I know.
third episode. It's come together pretty quickly. We hope you're enjoying it so far. And today, for our very third episode, we're going to be looking at a very famous movie, I'd say, of sorts, certainly of the Universal Monster canon, but even of recent note was successfully, but financially and I'd say creatively remade just last year, back when cinema existed in the theaters.
That was the last movie I think we saw in theaters.
Yeah.
We saw it separately, but...
Yes, is The Invisible Man. But we're not talking about The Invisible Man of 2020.
Not the Leigh Whannell film.
But we might touch on that here in a bit. But instead, we're talking about The Invisible Man of 1933, which is made in the very heart of kind of the classic Universal, classic monster canon, which Levi, I'll go ahead and out him, is a pretty big little expert on, and we'll touch on that here in a little bit.
I wouldn't say so much fan exactly as much anymore. I mean, I still like them a lot, but I know more than I need to at this point. But,
but we all have those things in our life that would qualify for that. So, first, let's get into some of the details with this movie. When did this movie come out, I guess, exactly?
Well, 1933, of course, it was pre-code. Normally, when I think of pre-code movies, the first few I think of, at least in extremity, are something like The Public Enemy, which came out in 1931. But and this is one of the first I think of, mainly because it has a sense of humor about it, but it's actually pretty violent of a movie for that time, especially for these monster movies. Obviously, Frankenstein had some deaths in it, and it had the girl at the pond, and Dracula, even before that, had some deaths and some kind of racy things, and so on and so forth. King Kong's another one of those, too, that came out the same year as this.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about that a little bit later, probably when we talk about in relation to special effects. But yeah, so this one was, of course, if you don't know the story of The Invisible Man, it's actually very simple. It was based on...
There's a guy? He's invisible.
Yeah, there's a guy that's invisible. It was based on the H.G. Wells novel of the same name, which I believe, when was that released? 1897. This also, supposedly, the screenplay is also based on something else called The Murderer Invisible by Philip Wiley, who supposedly wrote a lot of pulp magazine, or pulp books and magazines. I just looked into this a second ago and had never heard of this, and I wasn't finding a whole lot about it, but I just thought I'd say that. But that basically, it's about a scientist who finds a way to become invisible. And at first, it's just kind of a normal thing. He's just kind of wanting to try it out for whatever reason you would want to do that, I guess. But he starts to become insane because of the use of the drug monocaine. Has these other side effects that are very negative and cause you to become insane. So at first, he's trying to find a way back to be visible, but over time just says, nope, I'm just going to be totally insane and not care about my love interest anymore. And I'm going to wreak havoc on the countryside of England, but then the world. But he doesn't get that far, spoiler.
Right.
But yeah, so it's a pretty simple story. But in general, let's see about some details. It was directed by James Whale.
Very
who-
famously did the original Frankenstein
Right,
and Bride of Frankenstein.
and Bride of Frankenstein, and also the Old Dark House. Another really good movie this time. He kind of basically, as far as auteurs, I think, kind of won the Universal Monsters. I mean, he was the most influential, other than maybe the Sidemax brothers later on in the 40s, as far as a lot of the screenplays they wrote. But
Freaks, that was Todd Browning, right?
yeah, that was
Yeah.
Todd Browning who directed Dracula.
Yeah, right,
Now,
right.
I haven't actually seen Freaks. You've actually seen that.
Yeah, it's
But-
it's okay. I know it has a
Yeah.
cult following behind it. It's okay, I'd say.
But yeah,
it's a very odd film.
right.
But
But
yeah.
James Whale, very interesting filmmaker for this time. Also, very notably, was gay. So one of the first kind of big.
I think,
I
and
could
he was
probably
he
with
was
F-
open about it too. I
I,
believe.
I
correct?
believe so. And
Which was a huge deal, obviously,
I'd
at
say
that time.
Him and F.W. Murnau, I believe, was also a gay filmmaker this time. I'm not sure if he was open or not, but as far as early gay filmmakers, I mean, he's kind of James Whale's kind of the one.
Yeah.
And it was produced by Carl Emley Jr., who was just a big producer of all these movies at the time. Not a whole lot to say about him other than that's just what he did.
It was, I guess, one of Universal's
But
big
yeah, he was
producers.
kind of, as far as all
premier
these
producers.
movies, he's kind of the name
Yeah.
that put a lot of these together. But yeah, like I said, it was based on the H.G. Wells novel.
Now, who adapted this screenplay is actually an
Well,
interesting kind of
Yeah,
idea.
because firstly,
story.
it's basically was R.C. Sheriff and Philip Wiley also got a credit, I guess, but they were kind of the ones who made it into what it became. But who was it that originally they had?
Well, it was surprising to see that it was Preston Sturges who was, really
Sullivan's Travels fame.
Sullivan's
and
Travels,
Lady Eve.
Lady Eve. I mean, when you think of screwball comedies
On
and
Beach
some of those
Story.
classics
Yeah.
of the 40s, really early 40s, that Preston Sturges is one of those
Yeah.
names,
And it's just
which
weird.
is strange
Yeah.
to see that he was,
Right.
I guess
And-
this was obviously earlier on.
And
in his
supposedly in the research we were doing, and we can talk about some of that in a little bit, just something I have to say about that as far as the newspapers reviews that we read, which is very
Yeah.
weird. But anyway, one of the other things we found, this was like more retrospective reviews or talking about it, that James Whale was apparently unhappy with what the screenplay was at that time, that Sturgis had it, that it had something to do with the Russian Revolution
Yeah.
or something, which
Yeah.
is, I don't know. I didn't find a whole lot about that, but I just
which
thought
would
that
have
was
been,
funny.
just over 10 years removed from
Right.
this point, which is interesting.
And which
trying
is
to
funny because
implement
later
that.
on, and I can talk about the Invisible Man sequels later, which are my favorite. That's my favorite franchise of the Universal Monster movies, very easily. But that there was the Invisible Agent was made later, which was a World War II, basically propaganda movie that had the Invisible Man kind of, well, not this character as the Invisible Man, but another Invisible Man in it who was like a spy. I guess he wasn't. I don't really remember exactly, but I guess he wasn't that insane in that one. I guess Nazism was too insane. It leveled it out. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, but it's just funny to think of, what would that have been? The Russian Revolution stuff, would it have been like, trying to kill the Tsar and his ministers?
Yeah.
Like, but
Like, is Rasputin? Did Rasputin become the Invisible Man?
that-
We don't know. Like,
I don't know. But anyway, that just was funny to me. As far as the actors in this, it's funny. The first one listed here actually is Gloria Stewart, who my memory is failing me. I'm pretty sure was also in the Old Dark House. Let me check about that because I know there was a big lady actor in that. But we know her from something else a lot, and she was, big, a pretty big
Titanic.
actress
She's,
back then, but-
the old Rose in Titanic,
Mhm,
very
right.
famously.
But let me make sure about that. I'm pretty sure she was in.
Yeah, Old
she was
Dark
in the Old
House,
Dark House. Yeah, I was making sure because.
Which
my
is
memory's
I know
failing me.
you know more about it than me, is a good kind of alt monster movie.
because it's
like,
not. That's one of my. If you actually had to ask me what one of my more favorites of all these is, it would be that one. But I don't talk about it as much because it's not like the main monster, one of the monster brands of these.
Sure.
But that is one of the better ones. That also has Charles Lawton, Ernest Thesiger, who was also the Dr. Pretorius and Bride of Frankenstein. I can't remember if that also had. I don't think it had the guy that was the director in. I forgot his name. That was director in King Kong. I don't think he was in that because I think he was in the Most Dangerous
guys
Game.
in G-Men.
And that guy, yeah, he was in G-Men, but yeah, I also think he was in the Most Dangerous Game, which is not a Universal Monster movie, but it was around that time that I've also seen. But anyway, So yeah, Gloria Stewart has been in a lot of things, and of course Claude Rains.
Just his film debut, correct?
Well, technically, I was looking into that. Technically, it's not because he was in some silent movie in 1920 in England.
So it was like over 10 years before this.
Yeah, by far, this is kind of basically his debut.
Right.
Because
he was more known as a stage actor,
right,
I believe.
and he
right?
had worked a long time as that.
Yeah.
And what a debut of a movie, I think. It's really interesting because obviously a lot of the reviews talked about how he's only seen in the movie at the very end for like a few moments when it's like the lesson has been learned moment, and he like the monocaine and all that stuff wears off and he's just laying there dead. But spoiler, I guess.
Yeah.
But you know where this is leading.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very interesting debut. Of course, he would go on to be in so many more movies. Well, of course, he would be in a couple more Universal monster movies. He'd be in The Wolfman, obviously, as
I forgot about that.
Lon Chaney Jr.'s father in that.
Yeah.
And then he would also be in The Phantom of the Opera, the 40s version of that was in color, which I haven't seen that in a long, long time. But
and it's just, this is actually an interesting way to start this. Like, feels as though Claude Rains might be the actor who portrayed a Universal monster who actually probably had the best overall career.
Oh, by far, probably.
I mean,
yeah.
Karloff, I know he had a pretty successful career
Right.
outside of Frankenstein, but I mean, of course, with when you think of Claude Rains, you're talking about like Casablanca, you're talking about
Adventures of
Notorious,
Robin Hood. Yeah.
Adventures of Robin Hood. I mean, a lot of pretty great movies outside
Right.
of just being stuck in the
Yeah.
ghetto of being in these kind of
Right.
purely
Yeah, and I mean, he was.
Universal
I mean,
monster movies.
I don't mean this as badly as it sounds. He was a real actor. I mean, frankly, I mean, and I think somebody like Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi are real actors. I mean, because they're really good.
Well, it
but-
should be said that Bela Lugosi in Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon did famously play on stage the Burger King.
right,
Spelled,
spelled as in like the bourgeois
Yeah,
burger, right?
but that's for another day.
But yeah, anyway, so and those were all stage actors, obviously at this time, and we'll kind of talk about this in a little bit, but that a lot of these people were stage actors because film was so new. They had a different kind of acting style, which some of them grew into more as movies went on, while others did not as much. But, so obviously Claude Rains is great. William Harrigan, who I believe was, Dr. Kemp, who, very funny performance, I think, in this. I don't know if you remember it as much, but was the guy that he's basically blackmailing to help him out. And there's a scene later that'll be very funny where he's like, basically realizing that the Invisible Man could be anywhere at any moment.
Right.
And he's like, he could be peeking through the window. He could be over there. He's like, you're going to do nothing, and freaking out. We'll see that later. But he's pretty good for what he is in this, I guess.
Yeah.
Henry Travers.
No relation to Peter Travers.
No, I don't believe. Who, like I said, has been in a lot of things. Was in like Ball of Fire. Was in Shadow of a Doubt. He's just kind of in a lot of random.
We were just saying he's the angel in It's a
and
Wonderful Life.
Yeah,
like,
that was the other
probably
big
biggest thing
right.
he was in. Yeah.
So yeah, he's always usually pretty
Una
good.
O'Connor, who's most famous probably for her Scream.
Yeah.
She's in also Bride of Frankenstein. I
Right,
think.
she's in that
Yeah.
only for like a few scenes. She's in way
Yeah.
more of this. What do you think about her in this movie? Just honestly,
Well, speaking of, 1933, as we said earlier, I think really primarily is the Year of King Kong.
Yeah.
And Faye Ray screaming that. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the more memorable, also though, early sound screams. I feel like is Una O'Connor.
yeah,
Annoying, but also at
Yeah,
the same
that's-
time, expresses what
that's what
needs
I was
to be
gonna
said.
say. Is that it's so. When I was a kid, I didn't know what to think about it. I'd never seen anything like that in an old movie, especially. And I never knew what thing. I am annoyed by it, but like you said, it's so unique and weird and so expressive that I kind of like it, even though I'm kind of annoyed by it. But yeah,
Sure.
we'll have more to say about that. Her husband in the movie, Herbert Hall, her name was Jenny Hall in the movie, Forster Harvey. He's like, looks like he's drunk the whole time, even though he probably, and then he gets hit on the head a couple times too. So Dudley Diggs, who's the chief detective, I think he was that guy at the end. Yeah, that he's like kind of towards the end of the movie. He's like leading the whole thing,
Right.
as far as them going after the Invisible Man. And then E.E. Clive, who's like the dumbest cop ever in a movie, probably. I mean, other than another cop in this movie later that we'll probably be laughing really hard at, but.
I'm seeing some other names here too, as far as in very minor roles. It's actually interesting.
Dwight Fry is very recognizable in this. I've always recognized him. Of course, Dwight Fry was Renfield in Dracula. He was Fritz, which is basically the proto Igor in
Frankenstein.
Frankenstein. I mean, he gets got, so he is not in this, obviously,
He was on the
as
verge
much
of
as-
playing Woodrow Wilson, right? In the movie.
Yeah,
and then
that
he
was when he had
sadly,
like
had
that was
a-
like in the 40s. I think he had like kind of had a career. It was kind of down point in his career in the 40s, and that he was like, I think, a like Christian Scientist or something weird like that, where he like didn't believe in medicine a whole lot
Yeah.
or something. If that's not what that is, I apologize. I don't remember. But anyway, that he was on a bus in Hollywood somewhere, and I think he was on his way to the audition to play Woodrow Wilson. It was going to be a big comeback, and he had like a heart attack and died, which is very sad. But
Yeah.
I mean, he's one of the most expressive actors of this period, I think,
Well,
too, that I think
And
of.
we'll touch on this probably a little bit later, but like all of these studios at this time have like their little stable of character actors
Yeah,
that you see
right.
pop up in a lot of their movies, and
Yeah.
I think he's one of Universal's
Right.
versions of
Yeah.
that. I think
Yeah, and we'll talk here in a minute maybe about, or when we finish talking about some of these other people, I'll talk about, there were some interesting casting things I wanted to talk about, but Walter Brennan also, who we always love to see.
Oh yeah,
show
all time
up
hero. Yeah, One
in
of-
like so many movies. I mean, him and Ward Bond are pretty much the most that were in
Right.
movies at this time.
yeah.
But and John Carradine, who I've never actually noticed in this, but I'm going to watch for him this time and see if I can catch him. But obviously, the father of all the Carradine kids.
He's really good in
um,
Grapes of Wrath.
And yeah, he's in
movie.
that. He's in so many that he would play Dracula. He's kind of one of the lesser known Draculas because he was Dracula in like House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula. Those
Right.
later movies. One of which is good, and the other is not. House of Dracula is awful, but anyway. But yeah, as far as the random kind of casting stuff, they kind of went through different people that they wanted for the Invisible Man. The first one, obviously, was Boris Karloff that they really wanted. Now, another important thing to mention about these movies is that, as we know, Bela Lugosi famously turned down a great many performances because he didn't want to put on a lot of makeup. Now, as Dracula, he had played Dracula on stage for a long time.
Mhm. This after the Burger King on stage.
Right,
yeah.
yes, of course. Yeah.
So I guess that makes Lugosi is basically Universal's George Raft. George Raft very
Yeah,
famously
right.
turned down many roles.
Yeah,
at Warner Brothers.
and it's strange because he's I don't want to put on makeup, like,
Yeah.
and anyway, but so Karloff got a lot of his roles that he wouldn't take because he was supposed to play Frankenstein originally, Bela Lugosi. He was maybe even going to play the Mummy, I think, at one point. Both those went to Karloff, and of course Karloff became a massive star.
Yeah.
But with this movie, I don't remember why he didn't want to do it. I think it was something about his contractual salary, it says here.
Mm-hmm.
So then a couple other people, Chester Morris, not sure who that is. Can't even see his face. Paul Lucas, I think I've seen him in something before. And Colin Clive, very famously, who was Henry Frankenstein in Frankenstein, not Victor Frankenstein, which is something maybe we can talk about at a later date about how weird that is. But anyway, so they eventually decided to go with Raines, who was, kind of unknown, obviously, definitely in America, but especially in movies, was totally unknown. And I think that's the, obviously shrewdest, smartest move they could have made. And he, of course, had a great career and plays a really great part here.
Yeah.
But anyway, I guess that's pretty much it as far as those things. As far as when it, let's see, it came out November 13th, 1933. Had a budget of about a little over $300,000. I'm not really sure how much money it made.
Well,
but it
considering
would've
it's
made
got
a
all
lot.
the sequels, I would imagine it at least did
Yeah,
pretty good.
right, of course. And famously, I think that H.G. Wells was a little unhappy about it. Specifically, I think one thing with him was that he didn't really like something about that the Invisible Man, that Jack Griffin, who is the Invisible Man's name in this, was actually insane, and he apparently wasn't in the book as much. But James Whale famously said, like, well, you'd have to be insane anyway to want to do this. So
Yeah.
I don't, so that's kind of funny to me. But
Right.
yeah, it says here on Wikipedia saying that he had kind of seen him as amoral in the novel, but that Whale was like, no, you have to be insane. But one thing that Wells did like was Una O'Connor's performance. Randomly, he was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I like that."
So of all the things to
right,
be critical of,
yeah.
is actually, oh yeah, I'll go
Yeah.
for that. Maybe that's just like a humble brag thing for him. It's like, oh, she was so scared by what I've conjured up
yeah,
on the page.
I don't
Like,
know. But yeah, anyway, one thing. Do you have anything you have to say about the reviews really quickly before we move on?
We read just a few brief reviews, and what's interesting, I actually am interested to go back and read film criticism
Yeah,
at this particular moment of time, because it's nowhere near as in depth or as interested in some ways of the themes or the directors, all the things that we would be film criticism is much more interested in. They're just very like, this is here.
Right.
In reel 1, this happens. Reel 2, this happens.
No, it's
like,
very,
you know,
it's very, it's like a summarization.
yeah.
It's
and
very
so
weird.
film criticism as its own art form really hadn't taken off quite just yet. So it's always interesting to read reviews of this time, and I believe the ones that we read were pretty positive. I can't quite remember
I think
what
overall,
they were saying
most
overall,
of these
but,
were positive. But one thing that I wanted to remark, I think it was the New York Times review, kept harping on it's playing at the Roxy Theater in New York. And first, that shows you two things. One, that that it was, obviously the New York Times is a international newspaper. But it was at least more focused
even
on...
more local back then.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It was more focused on what was going on in New York City, specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And also that it just didn't play as many places because you didn't have as many movie theaters in the country at that time. It wouldn't be playing like around here somewhere.
Well, also that there were so many movies
Right.
that were being produced by Hollywood at that time. Like, if you didn't necessarily catch that one immediately, then there were going to be 5-6 other movies to replace it in no time, just because they were producing that many. But then they, some theaters second run, they'd show things that were slightly older. But,
but I just thought that was kind of strange because it kept harping upon that. And like you said, it's almost more of a summarization of the movie, and it's very quick and like
it just shows you in a lot of ways that films were not taken nearly as seriously back then, even as they are now, as far as being covered by the press. It was just not nearly as important as now we would put it on it. But I guess now we should transition into kind of our own thoughts, just in general, about the Universal monster movie tradition and canon. You can already tell Levi knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. He's watched a lot of these all ad nauseum, I know, in the past, and has read more about them. I'm not nearly as knowledgeable or aware about them in the same exact way, but I will say that these Universal movies, I think for a lot of people who are booming cinephiles or grooming themselves to become cinephiles, like, are going to be some of the probably the first older movies you encounter.
They were for me, especially,
and so I think I first remember, I actually didn't see this one until a few years ago, I don't think, for the first time. But the classics in terms of Dracula, Frankenstein, the first two that really jumped to mind for me. I think I also saw The Bride of Frankenstein pretty young. I remember watching them on VHSs in the 90s. That must have been a particular period when home video was obviously branching more and more out, where Universal was trying to put more of those out. Yeah. And obviously were very famous for years and years and played on TV for years and years before that. But I remember the first time I really encountered a great many of these movies were on VHS. And while they didn't quite have the same resonance for me as they did for Levi, they still were very important. Like I said, they were some of the first older films I remember seeing. And I think in general that's what's great in some ways about genre films, older genre films, is that they kind of ingratiate a relatively younger viewer into being more interested in something that is, this is in black and white, but it can still be fun, or it can still be great in its own way. And so, again, I didn't quite see this one until a few years ago, but for so many people, the Universal movies represent, again, what horror used to be, and especially in terms of what studio horror used to be, because obviously, as big fans as we are of classic Hollywood cinema, every studio had its kind of identity, its brand identity of what it was usually putting out. I know for Paramount, it was some mixture of adventure films and some Marx Brothers movies. Fox, I know 20th Century Fox, it was a combination of some John Ford Westerns and some kind of more prestige-y kind of picks. My personal favorite out of the whole tradition of classic Hollywood movies is, of course, the Warner Brothers gangster picture, which we'll be doing some of those, I know, definitely eventually. And then also MGM, the musicals. So all of the studios kind of had a brand identity, and Universal, obviously, most certainly, the one that is most memorable with them is certainly going to be those kind of classic monster movies. And again, I didn't see all of these growing up. I'm still catching some here and there, but there's a reason why the iconography is still very much influential to us now. Yeah, like when you just see the visage of Boris Karloff as the monster in Frankenstein. That just cuts an image, and what was the guy who did Jack? Who did the makeup? Jack.
Jack Pierce.
Jack Pierce.
For some reason, that took me a
makeup
moment to
for
remember.
that movie and many
Right.
others is just incredible
Yeah.
and extraordinary. And again, those movies aren't quote traditionally scary in the way that we
No,
would be now, but they thrive on atmosphere. Though I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just about a year and a half to maybe 2 years ago, I happened to by myself rewatch Todd Browning's Dracula from 2 years before this would have been, and I probably like it maybe a little bit more than you do.
Yeah,
But the thing
I
that
like it.
really sticks out to me about that movie is just Bela Lugosi's face, the way that it's lit, and so much of this Universal classic monster movie tradition comes from the kind of German expressionism,
Yeah,
which was
right.
only a few years
Yeah.
before this. And just the way that his eyes and his face and the makeup is all lit, it just creates something that modern horror movies don't quite get, but they're doing other things now.
Right.
They're trying to be
Yeah.
more conventionally scary. But in the early 30s, that in and of itself was scary enough. So,
Yeah.
again, there's a lot of other kind of classic Hollywood movies that I'm more interested in watching, in uncovering, than some of these Universal movies. But the ones that are ultra famous and ultra iconic are that for a reason. And, it's kind of also... They're horror, and they're not scary in the traditional sense that we would see now, but they are just kind of good, creepy fun to watch around
Right.
Halloween season, or with children especially, who
yeah.
want something kind of scary, but not
Right.
like straight up like a French Extremity
Right.
or
Well, yeah,
movie.
as pre-code movies, it's easier to get that because it is creepy, but there are some things, and it's not like too scary, but there are some things that are kind of toeing the line a little bit as far as like you wouldn't even see in even more mainstream movies now. I think
And
that
last,
are in a
just the
weird
last
thing.
thing I'll say is before I hand it over to you is that again, I think these movies at their best are gateways for a lot of not only
right.
children but also young, teenagers and people getting into movies to kind of again ingratiate them into kind of watching something more black and white, watching something a little older, and realizing, oh, you know what, the mechanics of this plot can still work, and even though the acting styles are certainly different than now, has their own little moments
Right.
of brilliance you
Yeah.
can find.
Yeah, I'm trying
Maybe I
to
should
think
take a deep breath.
Right, yeah,
because-
I'm trying to think of the best way to come at this at the Universal Monsters because I feel like there's so much to say, and I'm going to try to keep it as short and sweet as I can. I think there's two ways to come at this, both of what they mean for movies in general and also what they meant to me. And I want to talk first of all about sort of what you were saying in a lot of ways about movies in general. This is going to be a first weird way to come at it, but I loathe the idea in general that movies, it's a very popular on film Twitter, that movies are inherently, lies, and they are, this big game of smoke and mirrors, and they're there to fool you, and you're tricked, and the audience is stupid, and it's all this big game, and look at these magicians who are doing this thing, And I think that's something that a lot of people really thrive off of, that it's a very perverse medium or something like that, which I don't, it can be that, obviously.
You're saying that's not all it
But
can
I
or
don't think
should
that's
be.
all it can or should be, and this is something we talk about a lot and I rant about a lot. But the reason I'm coming at it from that is because recently we watched the movie F for Fake, the Orson Welles film, and I really was watching that and thinking, oh yeah, this is kind of that, but it's taking more of a joy in that. It's not like in as much.
I mean, one of the defining
perverse,
images of that whole
you know.
movie to me is how many times you see Orson Welles smiling
Yeah,
and looking at the
right.
camera and kind of winking literally and figuratively of like, oh, this isn't real, but look how much fun we can have while
Right,
we do it.
yeah. And so that made me start kind of thinking about that idea a lot. And I've been thinking a lot about early cinema, and I've especially been thinking a lot about silent movies the last year, which is something I haven't seen near as much of as I'd like to. But that I've been kind of thinking a lot about the history of the beginnings of cinema, how it started as these kind of, penny arcade, Nickelodeon kind of, sideshow vaudevillian type magic shows.
They're
almost.
they're literally like a photographed attractions, of
Right,
sorts.
and it's a sort of, cheap, kind of, what a lot of people thought at this time. I mean, the way they were talking about movies, like you said, weren't at that point where people saw it exactly as an art form yet. But that it was kind of started in these kind of...
I mean, there's a reason why popcorn is so associated
Yeah.
with the movies. That in many ways is carryover from like fairs and local fairgrounds where the very first types of films were being shown. You know,
and so the reason I say all that is because it's made me. I've been thinking about these things a lot recently and how they were, like I said, kind of a lot of people see a lot of different influences for movies at that time. Obviously, one of them is going to be theater, very much, because we talked about all these theater actors that are in these movies. But I think even more than that is that the idea of magic and vaudeville, and these are things that I'm not, other people say these things, but that I think magic and through that, using special effects as kind of this idea of magic are a very big part of movies. Like from Méliès, obviously, is one of the big first things to do that. You see a lot of his films, and there's these kind of looks like magic, some of it, So in that sense, the reason I bring that up is that a lot of this, one thing especially about The Invisible Man is that it is kind of heralded in a lot of different ways as one of the first science fiction films. Now, obviously, you had like a trip to the moon was a science fiction film, or even if not very many years before this, Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which I think is really kind of the first true science fiction film. But the biggest thing I have to say about Universal monster movies, I think, in that sense of talking about them as magic and kind of that emphasis on special effects and kind of that sort of genre storytelling, is I think that they draw so much from those movies we kind of mentioned, of those Méliès movies, those German Expressionism we talked about, or even going back as far as Thomas Edison's films, if he did that Frankenstein adaptation, or even The Great Train Robbery. A lot of these movies that are very special effects driven or kind of science fiction driven. But ultimately, all this is to say is I think that there were obviously dramas that were being made in silent films. Obviously, the first kind of person to do a lot of those big things was D.W. Griffith with The Birth of a Nation and Intolerance and these kind of bigger movie, or Greed, Eric von Stroheim. But that a lot of these movies that were being made were horror films or science fiction films, because that was what people were interested in, and that I feel like to make these special effects pictures, you kind of had to do something like that with that, or westerns as well.
Westerns too. Like obviously, like things that are much more genre driven, I feel like are going to get people into the theaters more so, just because it's this supernatural element or the other, or this action adventure element. That's always going to be the biggest attractions of cinema. It's no different now in 2021 than it would be in the 1933 in that way.
So obviously with this time period, like I said, you had some of these bigger, more ambitious dramas that were being made, but more so you had the comedies, you had the westerns, and you had the horror films, basically, mostly. I mean, you had stuff like Tarzan with those kind of action films, or like we'd see King Kong as kind of the first really major action adventure movie that has really influenced a lot of movies, since then.
Right.
And it was also one of the big special effects movies ever made, along with this. It's interesting that 1933 had two of the big kind of special effects movies with this as well as that. Obviously, that is on a far bigger level because you have so much going on in that. But I think the reason I say all this is important to note what an important thing for cinema that these Universal monster movies were. That they, like I said, were these horror films that got people into the theaters to see, oh, look at this kind of scary thing, and but look at all these special effects things we're doing, and kind of the makeup, and like I said, with Jack Pierce's stuff, or with John P. Fulton's work in this movie of all the invisible effects, which we'll talk a lot about as we're watching it. But what a big, influence that these movies would be, not only on the people who were watching them then, but especially that kind of TV and film brat generation that would make a lot of the 80s horror movies like Joe Dante or John Landis or John Carpenter, that were big fans of types of movies like these because they saw them on TV in the 50s and 60s, all the way up until today with that newest Invisible Man film.
We weren't over the moon with, but it was quite good.
No, I thought it was interesting. Well, first of all, the most important thing about these kind of new ones they're wanting to do is that they are trying to make them very, socially and politically driven. Now, of course, these early movies were either about Frankenstein, like, oh, you can't play God, or you can't bring back the dead, or with this movie, you can't be invisible. That's, playing with nature or whatever. Which, obviously, the big thing with Invisible Man is it was very much a Me Too expression, which I thought was very interesting for that, and the idea of the metaphor of the shadow of domestic violence trauma following a woman around, even though it actually was a man that was doing. It was a very powerful and interesting image. Now the movie itself was fine.
Elizabeth Moss, I think, was really good,
and
which
yes,
we
she
love
was
her.
very good. Yeah, we love her, of course, always. But it's a very interesting idea to do something like that. Now,
which is, I think, an upgrade over the whole Dark universe, which we can just briefly mention here, which tried to get kicked off with the Tom Cruise Mummy movie from a few years
which
ago.
you saw and I did not, but
no, I actually didn't see that.
Oh no, you didn't see it?
No.
Never
Well,
mind.
I'm a huge Tom Cruise fan, so I thought about seeing it.
Well, we've seen the trailer for that. Well, first of all, that was that whole thing with the trailer that was like the certain sound of it came in and certain didn't, and it was all the screams were in it, but then other things weren't, which is hilarious. If you haven't ever seen that, go watch that. But but
they tried to build like a whole Marvel style universe where that was going to be the first one. Then I think like Russell Crowe's in that movie as the Dr. Jekyll.
Yeah,
like
he
that's
was
going to turn into Mr. Hyde or whatever.
Which it should be notable to note that they did make a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but RKO made it at that time around these movies in the 30s, and Frederick March played him in that, which I've seen that, and that's quite good. But anyway, that was not a Universal film, though.
Yeah, I think even I would assume that it was, so that's a good...
Yeah.
The other studios were trying to do their own version of this. Was it Warner Brothers did those Dr. X movies?
Yeah, they did the Dr. X movies. Also in the 40s, they made that movie, The Return of the Vampire, I believe it was called, which had Lugosi in that, and he was not... Dracula in that, but that was all very much a World War II movie, which is strange. I actually only saw that pretty recently, and it was pretty forgettable. But anyway.
But it should be said, we'll just briefly go over this. We're actually huge fans of the Stephen Sommers Mummy movies, the first two especially, and I know those were trying to, I guess, kick back or bring back the kind of
like Van
IP.
Helsing would do too.
Have you seen Van Helsing?
No,
it's not good or that memorable. I remember seeing it as a kid. I think I played the PS2 game. That was okay. But
anyway.
So they're trying to bring these movies back, and I think the right thing to do is to just take them on a film by film basis and not try to do some connected universe. I mean, the success of the Marvel movies would probably lead Universal to think that's what we need right now.
Right.
I don't think so. Again, I think The Invisible Man, while not the newest one, while not exactly a perfect movie, was just a good little movie, and that's what these should be going for, not trying to be some larger connected thing. I think Ryan Gosling's in the midst of trying to do another take on the Wolfman.
Which, I mean, we need another take on that anyway, yeah.
Because
I'm being serious.
The Benicio del Toro
No,
Wolfman
but that looked
movie from
goofy as hell. I remember there were those scenes that were in the trailer of him, like, where it was like in one of those, like, auditorium, I don't remember what you call them, but like when, like in those like hospitals where a bunch of people would come and watch surgeries go on, those kind of art, and he was like turning into the Wolfman in the chair, and they were all like, oh my god, and it was like Benicio del Toro having a conniption fit basically, which is just hilarious.
And just the other day, we learned that Chloe Zhao, I think is how you say her name, who's recently did some films that we've heard great things about, but neither of us have seen. Nomadland and pull her up. There's that other movie she had done just a few years ago.
Let's see.
That got really good reviews. What's the name of it?
Well,
The Rider.
The Rider.
The Rider's the name of that. That she's now actually going to take on Dracula.
Yeah.
And that this is going to be shooting for like a some sort of a kind of a Western sci-fi feel, I think.
Which I think, by the way, I totally want to see whatever this is. I think it sounds totally ridiculous, but that's kind of what I love about it. But which is interesting, it's not the first vampire Western, because we had Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which was the first Iranian vampire Western, very famously. They made a big deal about that for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, they're still trying to do these, which I like, but we can't also forget who was going to be the Invisible Man in those Dark Universe films.
Oh, yes, so Jonathan Depp.
Depp
was going to be the Invisible Man, which I remember a lot of people were making jokes at the time that if he would have done that, he would have finally fulfilled his overall aspiration of just disappearing into like a hat and a scarf. Just and like saying nothing else. I remember people saying that.
Yeah, that would.
But it was not.
Yeah.
It was not meant to be for Jonathan Depp
Right.
to play that.
I mean, when was the last time an actor assassinated a president? You know?
a question that he once raised. Yeah. One. Do you have?
Well,
much
yeah,
else
I
to
know we're
say?
kind of rambling here, but what the main.
We're already almost 40
I
minutes.
know.
in.
Well, thankfully, this movie is shorter too,
Yeah.
so that's kind of why we
Yeah,
felt
yeah.
we could talk longer about this. But as far as closing up my first half of what I wanted to say about the Universal, I'm going to make the second half a lot quicker because it's mostly what Kyle had already said. But I just think these movies stand at a very peculiar place in film history. For kind of this was at the time when comedies were starting to get a little more. Obviously, I don't want to say comedies weren't sophisticated because you had the Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd films, which are very sophisticated comedies. So I'm not going to act like that. But comedies and dramas were getting to be, like all film at that time, a little more sophisticated, and you were having new stars that were coming around this time, and things were just being different. But that specifically with genre films of the horror films, this I think is the biggest step forward that was made probably since German Expressionism,
Sure.
which was just before then, and that they not only, like I said, influenced special effects in such a big way, but really just influenced a generation of filmmakers that would come later that really were wanting to not make horror movies scarier, but with an example like an American Werewolf in London, which is the scariest film I've ever seen. Frightens me to death. I don't even like to talk about it. Very good movie, but that movie really is just made like a universal monster movie, though. As far as specifically, even the ending is very much a throwback to that idea of the movie's over, the monster is vanquished, the movie's
Right.
over, you know.
Yeah.
And you just see a movie like that, and you see these older films, and you see really that, like, DNA of that type of movie is still very much a part of movies today.
DNA, much in the vein of Kendrick Lamar's DNA. Yeah, and you
DNA.
see the video for that
DNA.
with Don Cheadle.
But anyway, really quickly, as far as what it means to me personally, these movies, basically what you said, they introduced me to black and white movies in a big way, classic Hollywood in a big way. I think it's kind of these films, and then something I love still much more today is Alfred Hitchcock's films. It was the first kind of, other than like Tim Burton and Steven Spielberg, probably the first auteur I really recognize as, this guy's making these movies, and I still am
And
in
you
love
can
with
recognize their
Hitchcock.
name, yeah, right.
But
with
that
the
that
movies.
those were the two kind of first big things when I really started getting into movies when I was getting around 10 years old, that I was really into. So yeah, I mean, I could probably say a lot more about this, and we'll say things throughout. But
One last little thing I
sure.
might say before we go to the break here
Right.
is I forgot to say is that, and I don't feel like I'm imposing this so much on it after the fact, though I could see somebody saying this, but one thing that is interesting to me, and I'm not like I'll say this, I'm not super into horror movies. I like good ones for the most part. But one thing that I do find interesting about a lot of these movies of this era, one thing I am pretty interested in is the mad scientist film, the mad scientist archetype. That is something I find pretty fascinating for whatever reason. Probably because a lot of like early comic book villains were a version of that,
Right.
Like Lex Luthor. But one thing that is interesting to me though about watching this whole era of these horror / mad scientist films is, and again, I want to be careful that I'm not imposing too much of what's going to happen in the next 10 years onto these movies, but I do see an interesting way that these films, I guess, address the nature between science and what is coming and creeping up into outright fascism. That you
Right,
start to
yeah.
see with a lot of these mad scientist types that they know all the secrets and that they know that they're playing with fire, but they're their own god, and it's all about them manifesting whatever their dreams and aspirations are onto others. Consequences be damned, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, and I do think that it's interesting that obviously, I feel like the modern mad scientist really comes out of Metropolis.
Yeah,
That
right.
what's that guy's name? That rag something with an R. I can't quite remember.
I'll look that up. But yeah.
That he really kind of, the way he looks, his hair's real frizzy. He looks kind of crazy. And especially that's coming out of Germany
Right.
in the late 1920s. Rotwang.
Rotwang, yeah,
Rotwang.
right.
And that I do find that is interesting to go back and watch these movies and know what unfortunately is coming over the next, coming over the next 10 years, but what's happening in 1933 you can point to immediately is that there is this interesting nature, and you could speak more of this than I could, even of these Universal movies, how they depict a vague Europe.
Yeah.
That most of them do not take place in the United States. Most of them take place in this outside Europe.
Yeah, and it's important to insert here that in the 40s, a lot of these movies started taking place more in America.
Right.
And it was almost like the monsters were invading America, like they were, German or Japanese, soldiers or something. Like,
and so there's so many of these movies, like the way they depict the other, and specifically a lot of them, I think it's coded as fear of immigrants, which the 1920s was really rife with, unfortunately, here in America, and even in the early 30s. And so that makes the films, gives them a new unfortunate life, I think, to watch now, is to kind of sort through and see what they're depicting in their own outsized, exaggerated, generic ways. They still have something to tell us, I think, about the attitudes and ideologies of this specific time period that, I think is pretty interesting to go back and watch. Anything to say before we hit pause on this and start the movie?
Other than that, I think that the best of these Universal monster films is Frankenstein. I think that's probably the most iconic film ever made, other than maybe. Well, I think Wizard of Oz is probably the most iconic film ever made, but
specifically horror movies.
Right, for horror movies, this has got Frankenstein's got to be the most iconic, I would think, or Dracula maybe, but it'd be among those. But The Invisible Man, what it has about it that I love, and it's my second favorite of these. But what it has about it that I think makes it good for commentaries is very funny. It's a very funny movie. Yeah. And I mean, you can laugh at certain things in Frankenstein about his facial expressions, or him holding his hands up to the sun.
But no, that's not actively.
But it's not
funny. Trying to be funny,
right? But this is but what's so interesting and ahead of its time about it is funny, but it's also very violent and very dark and very serious in what it's about. But it's just this very specific kind of very ahead of its time tone, right? That I think makes it just so rife for commentary, which hopefully you'll agree, but we'll see.
Yeah, so we're going to take a brief break, and then we're going to be coming back here in just a moment with 1933's The Invisible Man.
Bandages right up to the top of his head, all round his ears.
Flora's worried about Griffin.
I had a terrible feeling last night. I felt he was in desperate trouble.
He meddled in things men should leave alone.
Not the slightest clue. That's where the clues are. He wasn't leaving anything to chance.
There must be a way back. God knows there's a way back.
I need help!
If only you'd leave me alone.
It's the stranger with the goggles. He's gone mad.
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. The mania of madness, you're peering through the keyholes and gaping through the curtains. And now you'll suffer for it. But why? Why do it, Griffin? Just a scientific experiment at first, to do something no other man in the world had done. Suddenly I realized the power I held, the power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
You know who the Invisible Man is, Doctor. Where is Dr. Griffin? What's the good of concealing it?
Oh, come and stay with us. Let's fight this thing out together.
Police, quickly. The Invisible Man is in my house. He's mad. He's killed a man tonight.
Believe me, as surely as the moon will set and the sun will rise, I shall kill you tomorrow night.
The secret of invisibility lies there in my books. Don't you see what it means? Power. Power to walk into the gold vaults of the nations, into the secrets of kings, into the Holy of Holies. Power to make multitudes run squealing in terror at the touch of my little invisible finger. Even the moon's frightened of me. The whole world's frightened to death.
I'll lay traps that even an invisible man can't pass.
Radio stations now. Watch the wall. Help! Help! He's here! He's here!
Here we go, gathering nuts and
me on a cold and frosty morning. Whoops!
And we're back, and we are going to hit play. And by the way, we should say we're watching this on the a newer set, I guess, that was released of
The
Universal
Blu-rays.
Monsters,
Yeah.
classic Monsters,
Yeah.
Blu-ray, which we just saw some clips from earlier. It looks amazing.
Yeah,
which,
well, we'd actually watched Frankenstein and the Mummy on this one. Those look really good too.
Yeah.
But by the way, should say before this movie is not rated, which does not mean unrated, but it is
Right.
not rated. But
Yeah.
anyway, so we NA on that one for rating.
So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hit play. Here we are again.
This
Universal
is our third
movie.
Universal film. We will say this about the next film we do will not be a Universal
Yeah,
film.
yeah,
So
but you'll have to wait till the very end to see which one that is.
Right.
Here you see the NRA. We do our part. We were just saying earlier that it took forever for me to realize that this was not the National Rifle Association,
National Recovery Association,
or ACT,
Excuse me, Administration, National Recovery Administration.
There you go.
Get all the alphabet soup got screwed up in my mind there.
Which, of course, the Depression's going on
Yeah,
at this time.
Well, one other
should be
thing I
thought.
have to say about this movie that I was going to leave until now, actually, is that it obviously is made in America, but it's about England, obviously, in the movie. But I feel like it's one of the most randomly prescient Depression-era movies because it's just about this all-out just violence that is just running across the countryside and cannot be stopped, which obviously, is a metaphor. I don't even know if that's a metaphor that's meant, but I just think about that a lot when I watch this, of just this total
invisible
uncertainty. One. Yeah, not the purple one.
Yeah, the invisible one.
But I just think about that a lot when I watch this, about this invisible menace that is,
You'll have to
taking
remind
over
me.
rural
Does
America,
this actually,
or rural England?
does this actually take place in 1933, or is it's
Well,
kind of vague? I guess when it
like
happens.
most of these Universal films, it's very vague about when it actually occurs. But they have like cars in it they have enough cars.
Okay.
I would think it's at least in the 20s, but probably I'm just assuming it's 1933. But
Right. Because a lot of these they're in the vague, like sometimes 1880s, 1890s, or maybe 1900s world, but just whatever. But
like I said,
despite
some of those 40s movies, especially the Mummy sequels, are very much in the 40s.
Right.
But yeah, I should say the Invisible Man franchise, I said earlier, is overall my favorite. I like pretty much all of them. They're goofy, they're fun, they're more comedic, obviously. Than the
I guess
others.
they don't have as many presumptions as some
No,
of the
and they
other
don't
ones
have
do.
to be like they really change what they're about too. Like there's one, The Invisible Woman, which is like, I don't even remember exactly what that movie was about, but it was like different about what it was about. It wasn't like, it's specific about them stalking, or she's a scientist. It wasn't at all about her being like a scientist necessarily. And then The Invisible Agent was about World War II and kind of using invisibility as a spy technique, which is very interesting.
It's always so interesting the more that these go on, and you even see this
Yeah.
with the gangster movies in their own way, is that like what was once lurid and was seen as like an evil thing, eventually are going to be co-opted, and they can be good too. Like, and the monsters sometimes themselves.
I love
even
it. By
fit
the way,
that
he
mold.
knocked on the door and then came in. Laughing
Yeah.
stops. Subtitles.
You know what I mean? Like that,
Yeah.
it's like something is
Right.
it's bad, but then over time, no, it's actually can be good too.
Yeah, because they're like, we have to make sequels. So.
Yeah. Even the monster in Bride of Frankenstein
Yeah.
is more
Right.
of a benevolent figure of sorts, I guess.
I mean, what a voice! I mean, everybody said this, but what a voice that Claude Rains has.
I mean, what it should be said too was this like a pioneer in the Groucho glasses like phenomenon, like like an early
in
alt
its
version.
own way, it's going on at the same time. So
Yeah. But yeah, like you said, I
Yeah.
mean, Claude Rains has to do so much with his voice in this because all this makeup he's wearing, and what a the transatlantic accent was
right.
kind of what's this whole accent was known as generally. That you're both British and American. Cary Grant obviously was a huge pioneer of that too.
So we live in a rural area. It's safe to say.
Yeah.
Imagine if some freak show like this just showed up in town and was like, "I want a room and a fall," like,
Yeah.
and you're like, "What?" Like, and you're like, "Oh, he got bandages around his head. Hit his head on the prison wall, getting over." As they'll say, but I mean, what a freak. I mean, You know what's funny? We haven't brought this up yet, too, that Amazon Women on the Moon,
one of our favorites, yeah.
which was, co-directed by a lot of those people we mentioned, of John Landis, Joe Dante, Carl Gottlieb, a lot of those people that were big fans of this stuff. They had made that one segment of the movie that was Son of the Invisible Man.
With
and
Ed Begley Jr. as the son of,
and they literally used the same set basically because that was a Universal film as well. But I guess they either recreated it or they just had it.
Well, it looks really good too.
Yeah,
I mean, because you see certain movies try to cosplay older time periods as far as the filmmaking style, and that actually looks really, really good.
Yeah. That's like any time I go anywhere, I always want to keep my coat on.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, it's the Invisible Man, even though you can see my head. But, but yeah, Una O'Connor we'll see soon. It's quite the screamer.
Mm-hmm. I think I don't remember if we'd said earlier when we were just testing this out. She's very famously in Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, no, we did say that. I think, but by the way, I want to say there's only probably about 10 or so of these movies I genuinely like. At the end, I'll probably give my rating of those, just for fun, if anybody cares. But The Bride of Frankenstein's a movie I actually don't care for too much. I mean, I
think it's a good. And you see it more than me, probably. I think it's good, but I think it's one of those movies that's very strangely overrated.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people think it's on par, if not greater, than the original.
Well, people are always searching for a sequel like that, where they're like, oh, see, sequels can be good too. And it's like, well, I mean, the sequels of these movies are probably better than that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, in my opinion, they probably aren't.
I wonder what percentage of that people thinking it's good has to do with it just frankly has a higher budget by that point.
No, I mean,
it has better
I think
production
it's
design and a little bit better.
It's clearly one of the best well-made movies of these.
Even the extent to which, Young Frankenstein's influence that it takes from that has put it in a different light.
Who's gonna make espresso? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's an alright enough movie, but I just don't really. I mean, I think it's interesting, but I just don't really love the way the monster looks in that movie where he had been burned, and it just kind of looks strange. But
yeah,
I'm gonna see his first moment of visibility here.
Yeah.
She goes again. What I love about this movie too is just the way that the people talk. That English accent is very weird. It's when you got some bad acne, you're like, nope.
Yeah.
That pesky old mustard.
Thank you.
Looks like he got caught by Jim Broadbent in Brazil when he's doing that stuff. Then one of his faces, he's holding his face out like that. Leave that hat.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Just think about the voices of these classic monsters itself, because obviously Lugosi's very famously got his voice he uses in Dracula. The monster in Frankenstein's very much grunts and doesn't really have a voice. That this is in some ways the very first voice of all those you can very clearly understand, is very more verbal of a character than the other ones. Probably because you can't see him.
Here's Henry Travers, of course, we were talking about earlier, walking around.
Mm-hmm.
I love him in this movie. He is a total dolt to be a doctor. He's like, oh, I don't know what's going on the whole time. Like, oh yeah, I did teach this old boy, but I can't help him now. But. What was I going to say, though? What were we just talking about?
The voices.
That was what I was going to say, is that for the most part, I mean, there are little things for each of these to say, but I think the Invisible Man, I would argue, is the only truly, totally human being of these monsters.
Sure.
Because you have, of course, Frankenstein is not even a human being. He's like a different human beings put together.
Yeah.
Dracula was, I guess, once a human being, but is now an undead vampire. The Wolfman is a human being, but he changes into something that is not human.
Right.
And the Mummy was once a human being, but is now undead. And the creature from Black Lagoon is definitively not human.
Yeah.
But so technically a lot of those were once human or kind of human, but he at least is totally human. He's just invisible. But I think it's weird he's the most human of these. Of course, Gloria Stewart and Dr. Kemp here, or that William Harrigan, I think was his name, or Harrington, or whatever it was. I don't know. But
it's been 84 years.
We'll probably be doing that one of these days,
Yeah.
maybe. But that's a surprise. I shouldn't say that. Maybe eventually.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Might do Titanic. I don't know.
Spoiler alert. Titanic. Good movie.
Yep. This scene, there's a moment at the end of this scene that is always hilarious to me, but you'll see. Of course, this is all that Griffin was his, or her, excuse me. Griffin was her boyfriend, or engaged or something. I can't remember exactly that. And he's ran off because he figured out how to do the experiment, and they don't know where he is.
Yeah.
So.
Meddled in things men should leave alone. What do you mean? Your father's a scientist, Cora. He's discovered more about preserving food than anyone.
Preserving food. Well, no,
I just
listen.
thought you put it in a mason jar and put it under the ground.
I mean, that is important.
Yeah.
That is important. Don't get us wrong, but
Right.
Preserving food is just such a okay.
like preserving food and invisibility. Those
Yeah.
are the only things they can do around here, you know. Mark drawers and drawn blinds.
Straightforward scientists. That should be the spin-off, like about just people trying to do their job,
Yeah.
and then you got all these crazy nut job mad scientists
Right.
getting in their way.
It's like the Coldplay song, "The Scientist," like the
Yeah.
straightforward scientist. Yeah, I know, but it's like there's nobody. This moment here, where he just like looks at the flowers.
It's like when you can't bear the awkwardness of somebody else, and you're just, I'm just gonna look over
That's
here
such
for now.
a theater moment. You can tell.
Yeah. Were there stage versions of this done before? Do you know at all?
I'm sure there have.
Because I would imagine this is actually one that could probably work pretty good on stage.
He said a bad word.
Canceled.
Look at the picture on the wall. Like an Ed Wood movie or something. Her first big scream. What's funny too about this is it's like the first 10 or 15 minutes, however long we've been watching this so far, it's like that's not happened, and then once it happens, the switch just flips, and it's just like every second, like
Yeah. It's Queen Victoria. On the wall.
Yeah, never noticed that. Tanimate. £3.10. See, I remember the prices, you know. His reaction.
You know who wears the pants in this coupling? Like,
And he's like, well. And she's like, I gotta get drunk. Oh. This is one of the most violent things in a movie I've ever seen. Just how angry he is.
I feel like he's always going. Well, I haven't seen this movie that many times,
Yeah.
but I just always remember him yelling and getting really
Yeah,
mad
right.
like the whole time. Like,
But it's something about that moment that just happened. I said, like, I can't think of any other way to say it. It's just so violent. I mean, it's just him throwing it against the wall, I know, but it's just like so weird for a movie of this time.
yeah.
It's almost like he's literally cursing in a movie, but he's not. Like,
Yeah.
But he's like throwing something against the wall. Oh, now we're all nice now. Imagine if you had to talk to somebody like this, though.
Yeah.
You're like, what kind of freak are you? You know. Like,
I understand, all right.
right, I'll have that then. I'll have that £3.10 then. You need a bottle of water,
Bottle of water.
bottle of whiskey. Nope.
Oh, sorry, I got like
Sorry, I've had 3 divorces already.
old lady needs you out of here.
I love he's like, all right, I'm gonna help you out. Like, see, he uses science.
Wow. Savage.
What I love about this is like he's just boxing himself in. Like, I mean, obviously he's going to be able to get out very easily, but because he has a perk. But you know, like any RPG game, like using invisibility perk.
Get him in here just to shut her up.
Yeah. This guy. This was that stupid cop I was referring to. He's like, oh, good, I have something to do. Like, you know how the English are. They're scamps, you know. They probably get up to all kinds
No
of
offense
stuff.
to our English
Oh,
audience.
no. Oh, love you, you know. But all those, mostly the kids I'm talking about. 'Cause
Yeah.
we'll see them later, these kids that are like, we wasn't doing nothing. Like, but they
Yeah.
clearly were.
Whoa.
And H.G. Wells was like, I support that.
So, yo, I'm into that.
I mean, these kids. But you can't see this. The adults are talking. No, who's like, I'm just going to get back to my work.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing happened.
Yeah.
Come along now.
Come on.
Stop where you are. You don't know what you're doing. I know what I'm doing, all right. Come on, get hold of it. Lock him up. All right, you fools. You brought it on yourself.
I'm going to do the John Hammond here.
Mm-hmm.
that I referred to in that episode.
Yeah. Remember, I just reminded that in Marriage Story that Adam Driver dressed up like him for
Oh, that's
Halloween.
right, yeah.
Like, had those glasses. And
It's weird. He had like a hat too.
Yeah.
It was like-
and bandages and all that. Imagine what would be going through your head if you're one of these people
Yeah.
and he's taking all that off and literally is like nothing's there.
Of course, it's important to say they're not the most flawless thing in the world, but the special effects in this are just still look so good.
Yeah, they held
I
up
mean,
relatively well, I think.
Yeah, to be that old, you know. Which that's one thing I'll say too about the sequels. I don't think they overall look as good as this does, just because you can't really do much better than this, even with better technology. But those still look really good as far as the other ones too. But they're a little bit cheaper too, the way they made them. They're just like, well,
What did you think about the whole idea of in the new movie that he's not literally invisible, but he's like it's by using these kind of hyper
it
HD
makes
cameras
more
and
sense because they explain how it works in this later, but it's still just nonsensical.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that. That's fine. The new Outback.
This was their like big chance to get him.
I know.
You can see the shirt, but
no, how you handcuff it? Like you tackle it.
literally, they're so dumb they can't get a hold of them.
Yeah.
Like,
But yeah, the
Not Britain's
blooming
finest.
shirt, the new Outback thing. Like I was trying to do an Australian accent, couldn't do it.
no, maybe next time.
Maybe next time we'll have an Outback appetizer. Oh, this like defiling the picture.
Jeez.
By the way, I don't want to complain because the special effects in this are so good, but the way that they like move that picture, you could tell was like with a string or something because they didn't want to like it just did they couldn't do it any other way. But like,
I feel like most of this movie too is him running right, like
Yeah.
just
this one.
pranking people, basically.
Do they literally hang out in there all day and night? These are like the same people that were
Where everybody
there.
knows their name. Like,
Yeah. Where's Norm at?
afternoon, everybody. Visible Man. Like,
Griffin! Like, so that, I think, was Walter Brennan, supposedly, they said. He stole me bike! Walter Brennan playing British, that's just hilarious.
yeah, you can kind of see that's him.
Yeah.
Like, no. Wow. See, it goes from I'm just gonna
We
mind
do
my
our
own,
part. I mean,
mind our own business to like now I'm just gonna mess with Paw and push over a
so
stroller.
they had a
like,
minor Jewish thing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing about these movies, especially in the 40s. They got pretty racist there for a while. So, especially one of my favorite moments in the whole thing was, well, shouldn't say favorite because it's not very good, but it's just funny to me, is that stuff. There's the stuff in the, like, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, where in the Wolfman there was that, oh Lord, I forgot her name, but it was the gypsy woman in that.
Yeah.
And, like, the way they talk to her in that is so awful, and it's just like, speak up, old witch, that's what Fry says, and it's just really bad. But especially, like I said, at that time, the gypsies were, among the Holocaust victims, and it's just like, the way that they do all that is so just, like...
tasteless.
Yeah. That's just bad.
That's what I mean by, like, most of these movies are very conspicuously not set in America. They're set, over there in that vague Europe, like, you know. This one more specifically in England, but some of the other ones.
And we were talking about this the other day, about how Son of Dracula, which was with Lon Chaney Jr. as Dracula.
Well, that's a combination right
well,
there.
actually, let's kind of pay attention to this for a second. I'll get to that, where it's talking about the way that they use
the chemicals.
Chemicals. Monocaine is the one that makes you crazy. So. You wouldn't, dummy. Like,
you wouldn't, bonehead.
You were always smoking dope rather than reading. Like.
That's reefer madness.
Reefer. Good old reefer. Yeah.
Well, if there's a, Rocko's Modern Life episode called Heifer Madness. Like, that was a hoot.
That was a heifer.
We're currently just going through and watching some Rocko's Modern Life, by the way. Just
yeah,
so you know.
Really good. I'd never seen that. That was a little bit before my time. But yeah, they're basically saying, that it like turns your skin translucent or something.
In an old German book.
All them Germans, like. I have another thought about Germany at this time I'll get back to in a moment, but I want to go back to the Son of Dracula stuff. First of all, you've heard me say this a million times. You've seen him. Lon Chaney Jr. might very well be one of the worst leading men of all time. Maybe.
He's not good. I've not seen many things with him, but the Wolfman, I think one of the biggest things holding that movie back
because
the
that
effects
movie's
are
mostly fine, is what it is.
Makeup's great. Like most of the actors are really good. It's well made. But he is not good at all.
Yeah, the Wolfman.
It's kind of important when it's your lead man too.
I know.
So.
Yeah, and the Wolfman stuff's overall my least favorite, probably of these movies. But yeah, one thing I wanted to say about that. In that movie, they have Lon Chaney Jr. playing Dracula. He was at that time, the Karras mummy in the last 3 sequels of the Mummy movies. So he was, and obviously, famously, the story with that is that he literally taped a whiskey bottle to his leg and ran a straw up to his mouth so he could be drunk while he was walking around, because he hated playing that role, supposedly, the Mummy, because that was like a very extensive makeup job you had to do for those. But anyway, in that movie, it's like in America, Son of Dracula, and there's a whole thing of like, I must drain this virile American blood, and it's like, my homeland has been wasted, and it's very much just like first of all, just racist, and then second, this idea of, this creepy foreign man that is preying on American blood, and it's just very, whatever. But
weird.
Anyway, that movie's actually middling enough, but he's terrible as always. But anyway, now obviously Griffin is going to come back to Kemp because he realizes he needs a partner to help him with all his different things. This is obviously doing all the big special effects stuff here. It's pretty good. They reused that shot here in a little bit of his reaction to that, as you'll see. But, okay, one thing I wanted to say about the Germany, I was going to say, I'm currently reading through The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which, as everyone says, is on a completely other level of literature. I know that's one of your favorite
probably
books.
my second favorite book, yeah. And I love Shaban as an author in general.
Totally amazing. I'm not totally finished with it, but I'm almost done. Almost made me cry the other day, which is something that's hard for to do, but I find myself doing more and more nowadays. But anyway, one thing that was interesting about that made me think about this a lot. There's a whole thing in that, with Anipole, who was their kind of boss at Empire Comics, didn't really like that they kept drawing a lot of stuff of, fighting Nazis and stuff. And they were like basically non-Nazis. They were like vaguely the same thing, but they had these different names.
Vaguely fascist.
Vaguely Nazi.
A good punk band name.
Vaguely fascist. But anyway, and that they were, because they didn't want to anger Germany at the time because they weren't at war with them. And then they talked about later how they were going to start making a movie serial out of The Escapist, which is their comic book character in that, and that they didn't want to have them fight Nazis in that either because Germany was such a big audience for films at that time. Yeah. Obviously, notably, I think that obviously Hitler loved Chaplin. His favorite movie was King Kong. Germany was arguably at that time was the most influential cinema that had been made, especially for these types of movies with the German expressionism. But it's just interesting that what you think about something like that that they saw that as such a market for cinema at that time that they didn't even want to approach something like that, which is why it was such a big deal that The Great Dictator did that at the time. But anyway, that you think about that in these movies as well, and the things we've been kind of talking about science and mad scientists are all this kind of German idea. That is, if not outright celebrating that part of German heritage, is at least very much trafficking in it and is not decrying it as much as it should be, I think. But anyway.
Meanwhile, he's just
no one in the world can save you.
Punking this guy.
Yeah. Imagine how scared this guy... I mean, we're going to see how scared he is later, but... Another thing I think it's important to mention about this movie, what I really like about it, it's a very cold movie. It's got snow everywhere the whole time. Yeah. There was snow on the ground today. It snowed overnight last night when we were...
It's already almost all gone.
And it's almost all gone, so sadly we didn't get to have that as much, but... It's also Super Bowl Sunday, by the way, in case y'all wanted to know.
But to have a snow day,
Yeah, we'll be singing about that. But this guy... It's like Churchill or something.
It's like Chamberlain is doing an awful job. I'm taking over.
People talk about cursed images all the time. Is the most cursed? Is maybe one of the most cursed images ever is like Chamberlain with the peace thing. When he gets all, it's just looks so dumb now, especially it's like Hitler ain't gonna be doing nothing around us no more. Nope. But anyway, very iconic image here. That's what's kind of funny about this movie is that half of it is him looking like this, because they have to have him doing something, Now, Kemp. Like he's gonna go kill him or something. It's like, but
now he's in, fiend mode.
I love this is what Kemp wears. This is his wardrobe. Here's that shot repeat here.
Yeah.
This is random. was gonna say something. I don't remember what it was about. Just that Super Bowl Sunday.
Hopefully the Kansas City Chiefs win. You'll
Yeah,
have known
hopefully.
already by this
Yeah.
point you're hearing this, whether they did or not.
We'll see. I don't know.
Just because, as you know, I like fine enough, but mostly respect Tom Brady.
Yeah.
But it's more about I'm a Carolina Panthers fan, so there's just absolutely no way I would support or root for any
Yeah.
NFC South team to be in the
It's
game.
kind of funny too that my and you are too, but especially our dad and I are big Raiders fans, and that Kansas City is a rival of them. So it's like either way, you're kind of.
Yeah.
But I actually I don't mind that as much as you do as far as rivalries and like that. But anyway, the Invisible Man. Gosh. Oh, somebody's ringing the doorbell. What's that?
Oh, now he's playing the fiddle, so to
Now I'm
speak.
thinking that it's like a doorbell in the movie, and they're just ignoring it. We will have a doorbell later, but I'm the fools. Yeah, fools who are like visible, like
visible
normal
fools.
people. Another, where's Jeff Goldblum when you need him? Like,
Yeah.
hey, never thought if you should,
Light up my brain.
The reefer opened my autistic mind. Like, grovel.
I love a good grovel.
That's a real, like, Milner moment from American Graffiti.
Yeah.
Like, we'll take them all. Like, we'll be invisible.
Oh, now he's in on it.
Yeah.
We'll begin with a few murders
Oh,
here and there.
I feel like that's something you got to work up to. A reign of terror. Like, let's slow it down.
They wreck a train or two.
Maybe that was a Preston Sturgis special there. Like, a reign of terror. Like, the Russian Revolution. A la the French Revolution.
Did it say anything earlier or later about what the original intentions of trying to make someone invisible would be? Like, what practicality that would even have?
literally he just wanted to do it.
Just bored.
Yeah. That's what I like about the Invisible Agent, is that it's like, let's actually use this as a propaganda.
Right.
The movie's propaganda,
military
but as a
application.
military thing, I meant, rather. It worked. So, but
The war ended thanks to our invisible man.
it didn't end, I don't think, but they did. Well, I don't remember. Did it? I can't remember. It might have. You go about Niggy. Not George Stevens. What's the guy that was like the squirrel in the church? Ray Stevens.
Ray Stevens.
That, of course, it's me again, Margaret. Are you naked? Not George Stevens.
The Fineskimo.
That's a funny image. It's funny how he's just like, I can do anything. But as we'll see later in the movie, they're going to come up with some ways they can try to get him. So obviously, this is the most insane thing any of these people have ever heard of, So, how many drinks? Only a couple.
There's Walter Brennan, you can see in the background.
He's Stumpy.
He's
We saw an invisible man
Wait.
over there. That's funny because that clearly is Walter Brennan,
Yeah.
and I've never thought about it at all. But
Come on. Come on, you fool. You stupid fool.
you're stupid, no good fool.
You are
As
stupid, no
Jar
fool.
Jar
Being
Binks.
Wesley Willis.
Oh, no more Star Wars though. This hit.
Type,
Yeah,
relax.
Wesley Willis, the original Madman. Yeah.
You are a stupid low-life fool.
Waiting for someone. Casablanca, what a movie.
Yeah.
What a movie. Also important to know that had Conrad Veidt in it, who of course was not only in that The Man Who Laughs, that was that very creepy movie, German expressionist movie, but of course
Metropolis.
Was he in that?
Oh, maybe not.
Well, he was in the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
That might be what I'm thinking of.
These kids. What are they even yelling here? See if you can decode it.
Maybe the subtitles will help us.
Well, they said crazies, but that doesn't sound like crazy to me. But yeah, just kind of random that both of them are like monster movie adjacent, and I never really thought about it that way. And they share a lot of scenes as far as Conrad Veidt and Claude Rains and Casablanca. But
I think I was thinking of Fritz Rasp, who has a very weird looking face.
Oh, that guy, yeah.
Too, but,
because he was that guy that was like that. Yeah, that weird guy in Metropolis. That's right. Forgot about him. Yeah. How heavy these look.
Yeah.
Lies.
Churchill setting them straight.
We will fight on the beaches. We will fight on the landing grounds. Country.
It's like he did never seen a pin before.
This reaction on it here. Oh, she gotta go off.
Oh. It's like their alarm.
Yeah. Or this insert shot of that stupid cop swinging his baton here in a second. Indistinct shouting.
Time to go get the the pitchforks and the torches. I don't know if they have that in this movie. I can't remember, but it's very famous in Frankenstein.
Sounds like the Penguin.
Yeah.
Jack.
Ow.
There.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. You
Get back, you kids. There. A lot of good line readings right here. Let's see here.
Wow.
What was that screaming? This guy. Good evening, Doc. You want a bottle of water for coal? All chattering.
They already got it in the papers.
Paper. Well, they know definitively that it's happening.
Read the papers. That's your policeman. That's your policeman.
Get her a doctor. She's
To
hysterical.
paraphrase Talia Shire from the end of The Godfather.
Is that John Carradine?
It looks a lot
Maybe.
like him. He's got a mustache you don't normally have, but
Here he's going to explain the ways that you can see him. Work? What, like be a psychopath?
yeah. See, now he'd just be like running a subreddit, like
Yeah. Be a creepypasta or something.
yeah. He is Q, is who it is.
Yeah. Him smoke. What if he like lit that on fire and then like his head caught on fire? So like, if he got singed on his hair and his face, would you be able to see that?
Yeah.
Like a lot of questions that we can't answer. Well, something I meant to say earlier. We never really did say where the first time we would have seen this was. You said it was pretty recently.
Yeah, it was only
years.
like 2 years ago.
I don't remember the
2.5
exact year
years.
for myself, but it would have been like
08, 09.
Yeah, somewhere around there. But I remember getting it from a library on VHS, and the specific VHS was like Gene Shalit Presents,
Oh,
and it
right.
had like a picture of Gene Shalit on the front with like the Invisible Man on there, and I was just like, what? Now,
Who's this guy?
Now, I remember him most maybe as his guest appearance on SpongeBob SquarePants as Gene Scallop, the food critic. But, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just something I always remember about this movie, too, is like, why is Gene Shalit on the front cover?
Yeah.
Like, this is weird.
I wish he was invisible. Jeez.
Very weird-looking guy.
Yeah.
Got big hair.
Like he stuck his finger in his lock
Oh,
socket.
take our hats off.
No respect.
Yeah, now this guy's taken over. He's like the lead detective that I was saying earlier. It's funny, the Uno Connor and her husband's like, get out of here, even though you want it. Like, we gotta get going here. Or no, they might come back in here in a second. I don't know.
You're in charge of all country east of here, Thompson, or 20 miles to the north of the main road. Neville, you take
Neville. He's literally the most British man ever.
you take charge of the search in the hills.
Stolen.
And
Hogan.
you take all
Hulk.
the villages.
Hollywood.
Hollywood, the Hulkster.
Oh yeah, they
Hulkamania.
came back. Yeah. They're like, looking like, oh, what's going on?
Terrible responsibility.
Why would they be cleaning any glasses at this point? You know.
Speaking of Hulk Hogan, that reminds me of a paraphrase of a movie of his that Christopher Lloyd was in. I was invisible today. Invisible
Now,
Man
I've
said.
actually seen Suburban Commando, and you have not, I believe,
No.
correct?
No.
I mean, one of the great line readings of all time might be, I was frozen today, but
Yeah.
another thing we love to quote all the time, there's a moment in there's that scene where, like, there's these, redneck guys that live near there, and he's, Hulk Hogan's an alien in the movie, and that they, like, he's saying, oh, what are you gonna do? You gonna, like, do, and it's like all these really specific ways to, like, kill him or maim him, and the guy's just like, no, it's the 90s. We're gonna sue you, which is one of our favorite quotes in any
I'm a big
movie,
fan of
so.
anybody saying, this is the blank.
Right.
Like, this is the 90s.
By the way, that was like 1990 or 1991.
Yeah.
It was like
Well,
barely
that
the 90s.
always reminds
like,
me of Die Hard 2, that he has multiple times. He's like, it's the 90s, or the 90s
Yeah,
or this now. It's just
right.
like, you're barely living in it. Like,
Yeah.
slow down. Like,
the children. Yeah, watch this guy. He's like, I am fed up with this invisible man. Like,
he's probably a Bolshevik. Like,
yeah. I mean, Russian Revolution. This guy's voice. Kind of reminds me of David Manners, who I also heavily dislike from these movies.
Well, dance music resumes, though. Like,
This little mini montage.
that is obviously a unique fear that this monster holds over the rest,
Right.
is you can't see him if
Yeah.
he's doing his thing,
It's like, what's more scary than what we can see? What we can't see. When you're creeping to get a snack, like,
Yeah. Creep into the ice box.
has this all been happening in the same night? By the way, I think so. I guess hasn't it? Like,
Well, I think it shows daylight earlier at one point
Oh,
in the day.
okay.
But maybe the next night, but
he sure. What? He's just walking around.
just chilling.
Ghastly. That's
Something
one of his favorite
ghastly.
words. Someone gassed me.
Listen to me, Kemp.
Whatever, Kemp.
You and I know that it's Griffin. I shall come in the morning. You must come now. I can't bear it. Come now, he'll be suspicious and escape. You must keep him calm and quiet for tonight. I trust you, Kemp.
Good old Kemp.
Big bad King.
Big old bad Kempy.
Leave me alone, Flora, please.
I'm not afraid. Tell me.
Jack Griffin's come back. He's at Dr. Kemp's house now. Jack Griffin's the invisible man.
Oh, well, that might be John Carradine there, yeah.
Well, that was him from earlier.
Yeah,
too.
that was that same guy, yeah.
Well, you get your own back and start thinking about whether else bank to hit him. The eagle stick on him, see? Then you can shoot him. Is that the police? I'm trying to tell you how to catch the invisible man.
He's like a Lost Marx brother, or
Yeah.
something like Chico Part 2. Is it Chico or Chico? Marx.
I've heard both. I feel
Yeah.
like I don't know.
We'll probably be doing some of their movies.
That's Wacko Marks that just
Right.
showed.
Stinko.
Yeah.
This guy.
Pinko Marks.
What's he doing?
He's a leading Baku.
Well, we only got 5 men here. Like.
One thing that it's inevitable of a lot of film at this moment. Not a lot of strong female characters in these movies.
No, I was gonna say I was thinking about her in Old Dark
Although I
House.
shouldn't say, that's unfair to say, this moment, because, I mean, Katharine Hepburn, Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, Barbara Stanwyck, all were strong female
Well, especially
characters at
these
this
types
time.
of these movies, though. Even something like Dracula's daughter. I mean, the titular daughter.
Yeah.
In that. It's the titular role. That she's pretty lifeless, as you would imagine. But I love this way he looks in this shot and what he says here.
I were invisible like you. There's no need to be afraid again. We are partners, bosom friends.
But get upstairs.
You must sleep.
Well, he's watching him as he goes up the stairs.
He's taking him to the principal's office.
Yeah, well, car approaching.
I see. You told the police. That was why you went downstairs. No, I didn't. I swear I didn't.
He clearly did too, But yeah, her in the Old Dark House. I was thinking about. She's in that more than this. Gloria Stewart. That's a very interesting movie. That it's more about a family of freak shows. It's kind of similar in a basic sense to something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre would eventually be. But I mean, obviously they're more hospitable.
Yeah.
But not by a lot though, as it turns out. But alone. He touches his head here like you got a headache or something.
Got an invisible headache.
Phantom pain. But yeah, that's a good movie. Like I said, that has a weird combination of elements of like Ernest Thesiger and Charles Lawton sharing scenes is just weird. And then I can't remember her name, but like the old lady in that, not the oldest old lady, but the like younger old lady in that. That of course had Boris Karloff as like the drunk butler who was like really violent.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good movie.
We must play for time. Why for time? We must prepare things. We try and bind him now and throw us off and escape. We must take him when he's asleep and chloroform him.
It's chloroform, that jerk. What? He was just sitting there invisible.
Yeah. And she just looked around like, oh, nobody's here.
And he's like quiet, like. What a weird scene this is. It's like, oh, like kind of romantic, and then he just becomes manic.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Lose
mantic,
the row,
but
like. That funny little head. Think about your stupid bandages, like.
What about
your
everything
glasses.
about the way you look, freak?
I wanted to do something tremendous. To achieve what men of science.
Not like what your father did with preserving food.
Yeah.
I said, just take a mason jar and some vinegar, and I think you got it. You know,
It was a
Like,
dose of vinaigrette. Like,
I had nothing to offer you, Flora. I was just a poor, struggling chemist.
no, the poor scientist.
Very soon now, the secret of invisibility lies there.
Oh, look, her acting is almost better than his acting in this scene. The way she has to watch him.
Yeah.
Like,
And then I shall come to you. I shall offer my secret to the world with all its terrible power. The nations of the world will bid for it, thousands, millions. The nation that wins my secret can sweep the world with invisible armies.
no, Army Hammers, I hope.
no. Canceled.
Oh, can't even say his name. Delete that name.
Delete that DM.
He's clearly a maniac, you know.
Yeah.
And Army Hammer. But I was referring to Invisible Man, but also
He needs to
that.
make like the Invisible Man
Yeah.
and leave, I guess.
You never take
Maggot.
Don't you see what it means? Power. Power to rule. To make the world grovel at my feet.
Listen to me. Listen. My
It's
father
been 84 years.
monarchy, even you do it now. It alters, changes you, makes you
Look, he's like,
Yeah.
what?
I hope you know what you're fighting. Oh, come and stay with us. Let's fight this thing out together.
Love this shot.
Power to walk into the gold vaults of the nations, into the secrets of kings, into the holy of holies. Power to make multitudes run squealing in terror at the touch of my little invisible finger. Even the moon's frightened of me, frightened to death. The whole world's frightened to death.
What's that?
Oh,
Better get out that Tommy
coppers
gun.
are here.
Yeah.
So,
Kim couldn't sleep.
he had to go downstairs. He was frightened. I put my trust in Kemp. I told him my secret, and he gave me his word of honor. You must go now, Flora.
I want to help you.
There is nothing for you to do, my dear, except to go. I shall come back.
The screenwriters to the female character.
Yeah.
Nothing for you to do. Be gone. Like sure you get to vote, but nothing in science. Like.
Which of the major Universal monster movies do you think has the most justified, like, immediately resonant or at least relevant, like, love interest subplot? Because a lot of them try to do that, but
I don't know that any of them do. I'm trying to think. You fit of these main ones?
Yeah, the main
'cause
first ones,
The
I
sequels
guess.
don't even have that either. So,
I mean, I guess Frankenstein has an okay one.
I was gonna say
but-
that's one of the better ones.
Link hands.
Like it's a game.
Yeah.
Gonna play Ring Around the Rosie or what's that one where you like clothesline people? Red Rover.
Yeah, Red Rover, send Invisible Man right over.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that though. Probably Frankenstein.
Yeah. Like you said,
Most
they're
of them
all
are pretty just basic
weak.
predatory
Yeah.
nature, yeah. Or they're the damsel or whatever, yeah.
Thank you, Kemp, for opening the window. You're a true friend, Kemp. A man to trust. I've no time now, but believe me, as surely as the moon will set and the sun will rise, I shall kill you tomorrow night. I shall kill you even if you hide in the deepest cave of the earth.
Wow.
10 o'clock tomorrow night. I shall kill you.
His freak out. Link hands like someone smacked my face. Link hands like clap hands. The Tom Waits song. Now, obviously, if he weren't so arrogant and had such an ego of wanting to, you know, fool them, he probably could get really far away.
Yeah.
But oh well. Pride comes before the fall. This woman screamed. Like, where? Like, wow. The pants.
Invisible pants.
Sisterhood of the Traveling Invisible Pants. Oh, this is a very strange moment.
Here we go gathering nuts in May, nuts in May, nuts in May. Here we go gathering nuts in May on a cold and frosty morning. Whoops!
Yeah. This is my favorite little section of the movie coming up here in a minute when he's just his reign of terror truly begins. Like, he's just nuts.
Nutso.
Have we established that Jack Griffin might not be all the way there at this point? Like,
That's yeah.
Kemp called me up. He told me the man was here. He wanted my help. Why did he ring you before the police? Why did your daughter come too? She came to drive the car. You know who the young man is. 'Cause 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 you know who the young man is. '
is the who are the Invisible Men in the other movies? Is it like?
Well, I know that Vincent Price was actually. Oh wait, gotta let him go off, King. But yeah, Vincent Price was in the second one, which that's a pretty good enough movie. And then let's not also forget that he was the Invisible Man at the very end of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, too, randomly. But that he was in that. I think he was like vaguely related to him, like he was his brother or something.
Right.
I don't remember exactly.
What I really love is he could obviously just kind of escape and go
that's what I'm
somewhere
saying,
else, but
like-
he's like, I'm going to stick around here and I'm going to just like run right on all these people because I'm crazy.
But yeah, and then the Invisible Woman was just some woman. Invisible Agent was like he was a OSS or something, like soldier. I don't know. This is just the worst thing he does in the movie, I think.
Yeah,
probably.
Seems pretty objectively, it is.
Like, this is pretty raw. For,
Yeah.
I mean, like 1933. I mean, gosh. But yeah, and then that last one, I think it was the Invisible Man's Revenge or Revenge of the something like that. That one was like some really complicated plot about like revenge over some like African expedition that the guy was left for dead or cut out of some money or something, and he was like getting revenge for that, and he somehow became invisible. But I think it was he like used the old like experiments of this stuff, and somehow he got a hold of it and was like, oh, I can do that, and that's my revenge tactic, like, or something. Like all the things are pretty different as far as what's going on in those. Dwight Fry.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I have to say now, Dwight Fry's Renfield is one of the great early performances of that type. I also think that, and I feel bad because I can't remember the guy's name, but the Spanish version of Dracula, which is actually...
Which I know a lot of people actually hold in higher regard even than the original.
I might actually myself, maybe, other than the fact that it just doesn't have Lugosi. But that guy who played Dracula in that was really good. But the guy that plays Renfield in that, you remember in the regular Dracula, there's that scene where they like find the ship, kind of like what it was in Nosferatu. It was the same thing where he like takes over the ship and kills the whole ship off. Same thing happened in the Dracula novel.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there's that part where they go in and they see Renfield at the bottom of the steps, and he's doing his whole or whatever. In that moment, in the Spanish version, that guy is like laughing. The craziest I've ever heard anybody laugh in a movie is so insane. Like it's just wild, but great. That guy's really good too. Yeah, but that actually is a pretty good. What's interesting too, that was a very early moment in movies of sound movies where they were recording totally different versions of the movie with Spanish actors. They would like take those same sets that night and film the Spanish versions of them, which were mainly for like Cuban audiences, I think.
Yeah, it's Cuba specifically. We had a pretty big film American import market there,
But that was something that very quickly stopped being done. But the only really serious one of those that still exists is the Spanish Dracula. Like I think most of these other, and I'm not even sure that they did that for all of these, but for most versions of movies like that, I think pretty much that's the only one that still really exists and is by far the only one people talk about. But
unfortunately, we didn't get Spanish King Kong or
Spanish. I mean, imagine a Spanish version of this. I mean, this movie's already off the chain. Can you imagine the acting in that? What that would be like, But yeah, that's a pretty good actually, maybe a little bit of a better version. Not only because the acting is better, but also there's some filmmaking choices that are a lot riskier and kind of more raw and
Right.
interesting, and yeah, it's just very different. But it's actually a longer movie too. It's like 30-some minutes longer.
Wow.
And there's like nothing I don't think that's really added to it. It's
Just the
like
scenes
just
themselves
longer.
are
It's
longer.
kind of like the director's cut of Margaret. You said the Kenneth
Yeah.
Lonergan film, where there's not really a whole lot added as far as scenes. It's just like the scenes are just longer. I think
Yeah.
they just let it breathe a little more. Because that's one thing about the first Dracula is it feels a little rushed, some of it, but whereas that really takes its time. Yeah, and obviously they're talking about you can using John Carradine's idea,
Yeah.
you know, because he'd smell it, dummy.
We should have had that actor who was like the cop in the Public Enemy, and he plays the cop in a lot of those
Yeah.
gangster movies.
Right.
Like, we're gonna get this Invisible Man.
Yeah. Remember the
Yeah.
cop in Scarface that was like lead pardon a little bit. He's like
Yeah.
that guy. They all got that guy. Like, was that an RKO movie? That original Scarface?
No, that was
Who made
Universal actually.
No, it was because yeah, then
Boris
it was
Karloff's in it.
'cause now
and
it's like a Warner Brothers.
that was Paul
owned
Muni
movie, but-
before he
yeah.
was a Warner Brothers contract player because he was a little
Oh,
later.
no,
And George
no.
Raft.
It still is owned by Universal. Never mind, because it's. I forgot.
because the
Yeah.
'80s Scarface is
Right.
also Universal.
Right.
movie. But yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, these studios, while they had certain identities, sometimes
Yeah.
they did cosplay of other
Right.
studios, and that's like Universal trying to do a Warner Brothers gangster
Yeah, right.
movie. And again, interestingly, George Raft was in that. He'd eventually become a huge
Yeah.
Warner Brothers star, but and He Still Not Die, classic.
Like naked feet. As we'll see, one of the funniest bloopers in any movie later we'll see is that it's supposed to be naked feet, but it's like shoe feet, footprints
Right.
at the very end, which is just like, how could you screw that up? I don't know.
Yeah.
Very weird. I don't know. Some things that just defies explanation. I'm just like, I don't know. Because it ain't like they're really getting somebody to walk out on the snow like that anyway, the way they do the effect, you know.
Yeah.
I'm going to get away. His whole attitude is, but as we'll see.
He thinks he's got it all figured out.
Mr. 10. You suppose you'll try getting them to the station? What are you like going to do? No. Oh, pretty cat. This is sad. That poor cat.
Probably took a good week or so to get
Yeah.
all that off.
Well, and it might be a stray, sadly.
Yeah.
Nobody... Let's not talk about it anymore. It makes me sad.
But, you know, all these other people.
Oh,
whatever
but
happens
he's
to-
there.
Hall of Fame moment coming up.
Yeah, I'll say we really got... Well, we'll just let all this happen.
I want to help you. Let me be your partner. I've had a cold and uncomfortable journey just to keep my promise at 10 o'clock. I went into the police station with you, Captain. I stood by while you changed into that coat. I rode on the running board of the car that took you home again.
You think you're going to get away. That's a pretty good effect there, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, how do they even do that? Oh. What? What are they talking about?
I hope your car's insured, Captain. I'm afraid.
I don't know if it's going to matter.
Did they even have car insurance back then?
I guess so, yeah.
We will. That's fine. Just sit where you are. I'll get out
Yeah.
and take the handbrake.
Insurance is always trying to screw somebody.
You are. You'll run gently down and through the railings. Then you'll have a big thrill.
A big,
Big thrill.
Then you'll do a somersault and probably break your arms. Then a grand finish up with a broken neck. Well, goodbye, Captain.
Greatest parting line here.
Yeah.
You're a dirty, sneaking little rat as well.
Goodbye. After all that, goodbye, though.
Yeah.
How many clips of movies have we seen from the 30s where a car's going over
I know.
the cliff?
And it just explodes, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like one of the great car death explosions. I mean,
Yeah.
that's up there with like Mike Starr and in Black Dynamite. I want to say about that though. A very good friend of mine, Carla Pike, I went to college with. Oh wait, that guy who's like halfway asleep. But she likes to send me a gif of that every now and then. That car crash.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if she's seen that movie or not, but I mean, you gotta love it the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. This movie's already almost over. Well, you gotta do what you gotta do, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one thing about this movie. I would have liked to have seen a longer cut of it, you know, just like him just doing even more craziness, you know, that would have been fun. But this feeling good. This old guy.
Just doing his thing, minding his own business.
I mean, it's his barn. What's he doing with that straw? He's like touching it? Like, why? Tell you, he's clearly not touching anything.
Yeah.
Just touching the straw. When you're gonna get a snow day, like,
Yeah.
or you're gonna get you're at least definitely gonna get a 3-hour delay. Like,
A 3-hour delay.
Excuse me, sir. There's breathing in my barn. What do you mean, breathing in your barn? The invisible man, sir. Sure as I stand here. The farmer may have imagined it, but we can't leave anything to chance. Surround the barn.
He may have imagined it, but
Yeah,
we're gonna
like-
burn the barn down. Like,
oh, specifically, there's an invisible man that's been walking around. It's like there's breathing in my barn. Like, I'm sure he's probably not imagining it, but
Yeah.
whatever. I don't know. This is the big like crime doesn't pay British style, you know. It's like pre-war. Yeah, they're like, well, we're gonna have to pay you, but
yeah. I mean, they better pay him. They're getting ready to, you know,
I know.
mess up his place.
I mean, but you've got to take this guy out. I mean,
Oh yeah.
Barn's waiting for you if we're successful. That's the place. We're lucky to have the open country. Get your men over to the line of trees and cover the country from the road to the top of the hill. Line the ridge through those trees. Double. Now, Chief, there's no time to lose.
can you imagine Boris Karloff's voice as this though? That'd been kind of interesting. I, mean,
Yeah.
I think it works so well as this, but
Yeah.
you know,
Keep in single file. We don't want a lot of your footprints around the barn. We want
one of my favorite moments actually. But now I'm thinking of that. House of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
There's a moment at the beginning of that. He's in that, but he's not. I don't remember exactly what his role in that movie was, but he's like not the monster. That was like I think Glenn Strange. I think played the monster in that one. But anyway, that like there's a moment at the beginning of the movie. He's like in prison, and he's like wanting chalk to like draw on. He's like a scientist of some sort, and he's like, grabs a guy by the neck while he's like in. He like walks up to the bars and he grabs him. He's like, "Now will you give me my chalk?" But like, oh, here's that blooper there. That like, what? You know, it's just like it makes no sense. I mean, everybody talks about that, but it's just ridiculous. And the way that it looks when he falls, it's like, weird. Now will you give me my shoes? Giving him the copping a feel here. As Mackenzie Phillips asked in our previous episode, like, you copping a feel?
I don't think your guard will be needed any longer.
That guy's like Kemp Part 2 or something.
Are you Dr. Crowley? Yes, I had a message to come immediately. Towards dawn this morning, he grew quiet. He called the name of a girl.
I love he was like ranting and raving up until then,
Yeah.
and then he was like, I don't want to talk about those
Yeah.
things.
Shut up.
I think your daughter
Or as the Cosby said, we don't talk about that. I don't even know if that would make sense. I mean, none of this really makes sense, I guess.
It's whatever they say.
She's coming now. You ever watch old movies that are like in hospitals and you're like, thank God we have modern medicine?
Yeah.
You know, it's like
Just how bare bones they look,
Yeah.
and you can tell they. We were thinking that recently. We were rewatching The Godfather.
Yeah.
Hospital scenes in that.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think you failed. I mean, I think you got out
You
what
went
you
insane.
wanted, but yeah, I mean, I guess
it failed at larger game of life.
right, but his life insurance and that you get in the game of life, it didn't work out. That life insurance, very weird effect. It's weird to see a really young Claude Rains too, because I think of him as like a 1940s thing. You know,
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's weird.
R.I.P.
And of course, like all these movies, it's just like, well, it's over.
The plot has concluded.
His arm. What?
The Invisible Man done got.
It's actually pretty interesting for a movie back then, you know, to have not shown the main person's face the whole time. You know?
Right.
Just weird.
Yeah, very novel. Yep, great. Among the very best
Yeah.
of these. The Invisible Man. Oh, now he's the Invisible Man. He was the Invisible One at the beginning.
Oh,
but
right. No, the purple one.
Harry Stubbs.
Harry stuff.
Merle Tottenham.
Dudley Diggs, like Donald Stewart, related to Gory Stewart? I don't know. Merle Tottenham. Well, Una O'Connor. Scream. Didn't get much more
rest in
screaming
peace.
out of that, you know. Oh well.
Yeah, so that concludes The Invisible Man. Again, any new impressions after having? I know you've seen it a bunch.
Yeah,
but,
not particular. Well, do you have any?
Not really. Just that. Really, just how good the effects for the most part.
Yeah,
holds up
I mean
with
that's the
movie.
main thing I think of. It's really interesting, like I said, to have two big effects movies that are so good like this and King Kong in the same year. I mean, I said King Kong is I think one of the best movies ever made, and this isn't necessarily that, but that is just on another level of movies. I mean,
And then
it
as
really
we've been
pushed,
talking
yeah.
the whole time, how well Claude Rains does just
Yeah.
really with his voice, and then obviously the physicality of being in
Right.
his face covered, like awesome work by
Yeah.
him, And
Yeah.
again, to be his first real kind of sound picture,
Yeah.
incredibly impressive
Yeah.
for his part.
And it's obviously he would have a career that would almost eclipse this, by not almost, it just would. I mean, he was in some of the biggest movies ever made.
Right.
But still to be really that good, at this time. I mean, this would have been, I guess, about a little under 10 years before Casablanca.
Yeah.
About 6 years, 5 or 6 years. When did Adventures of Robin Hood come out? 38 or 39?
38, I believe.
But yeah, I mean, really good. Like I said, James Whale, very good director.
38, yeah.
I haven't seen very many of his movies outside of these monster movies. I know he did Showboat, that original 30s version of Showboat. He did a lot of other movies I'm very interested to see. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that the Invisible Man movies get the most out of their premise because there's a lot you can do with that. It's a special effects movie.
That makes it much more elastic plot-wise, as far as you can kind of
do whatever you want to do. Yeah, and it's more fun to watch. I think what works about that too is that the voices of the actors have to be on another level, so you get a very manic performance.
So it's no surprise that Vincent Price was in
right.
Invisible Man.
Yeah, and he's really good too with that. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's a very funny movie, but also a very violent and kind of raw movie for this time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess the only thing for me to do, if anybody cares, I meant to say this earlier. 2 summers, summer of 2019, I decided, and I had seen a great deal of these movies over the years, but I hadn't seen a lot of the sequels. Stuff like She-Wolf of London and The Mummy's Ghost or Ghost of Frankenstein, all the ghost ones, But
a lot of the sequels that aren't as well known.
And I should say also that as you probably know, the Universal monster movies go just beyond these main few monsters. They have a lot of other films that were made, like The Old Dark House. We recently just watched The Black Cat, that Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi movie.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, and I'd like to see The Raven as well, which is another movie they did together. But as far as, there were a lot of other movies that were made other than these. The Island of Dr. Moreau was another one. We've both seen that. Yeah. That's good. Stuff like The Mad Ghoul, Tower of London, The Brute Man, all that kind of stuff I actually haven't really seen any of. But as far as all the main kind of monsters, which you would loosely call Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Wolf Man in his various forms, whether it be the Werewolf of London or the She-Wolf of London or those regular like Lon Chaney, few of those that they made, and then of course Creature from the Black Lagoon. But as far as all those, I watched through all of those in 2019 in order of when they were released, and that was quite the project. That was 28 movies. I think I started in May and I finished in August or so.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I made a list on Letterboxd. If you go to my Letterboxd, you can find it.
Elhuff98.
Elhuff98 on Letterboxd if you have a Letterboxd. But I was going to go through what my top 10 were. Now, there's 28 of these, but this was at the time what it was. It might even have changed since then. But my top 10 Universal Monster films ranked. Number 10, House of Frankenstein, which is the better of the two what they call Monster Rally movies, those were the movies that had like Frankenstein,
multiple
Dracula,
ones, yeah,
and the Wolfman in them. House of Dracula is actually quite awful, but House of Frankenstein's good enough. That, of course, that has Now Will You Give Me My Chalk, which is a moment I really remember. Number 9, the Bela Lugosi Dracula, which is a movie I used to really love and used to be my favorite, but there was something about it when I watched it that last time that I felt was kind of slow and lacking. Bela Lugosi's great, Dwight Frye's great, but anyway. The Invisible Woman was number 8. Let me see about this. Yeah, that's right. She was like a store model or something.
Okay.
And she
wasn't Sue Storm.
No, but she became like a test subject for a machine that will make her invisible. It was like some guy wanted. I think that movie randomly also had the lady who played Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the only other movies I've seen her in, other than like Brewster McCloud randomly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that movie was all right. The Invisible Agent was number 7, which I've talked quite a bit about that. But that was like World War II movie.
Yeah.
But with the Invisible Man. The Mummy,
which you used to really quite like.
I used to really love The Mummy a lot. Now I still like it a lot, but it's just very slow, which I kind of like about it. It's a very dreamy movie in a way that some of these other ones aren't. Kind of surreal. That also very famously has the first impalement on screen, randomly, at least in a big movie. Was that scene where it's the flashback where they're showing how they buried the sarcophagus and they killed all the people and they like threw those spears at. It's actually pretty violent even for today. But I do like that movie. Boris Karloff's great in it. Obviously that movie's notable for not having him be in the bandages the whole time, which would be more of a thing for the Karras sequels that they would do of all those. Those are all awful, by the way, but anyway. And then the Spanish Dracula was number 5. That was Carlos Villarreal was the Dracula in that. And then Lupita Tovar, who's actually kind of a known actress at that time, was kind of an early sex symbol for a lot of movies.
Yeah.
And then it was Pablo Alvarez Rubio was Renfield in that. Big performance in that. The Invisible Man Returns.
Is that the first of the
was
sequels?
Number 4. Yes, that was the first of the sequels, and that had Vincent Price. Also had Cedric Hardwicke, who I've always thought was one of the funniest random actors. Very boring looking man. But anyway, no offense to the estate of Cedric Hardwicke, because I actually kind of like him. But that movie's good. I don't remember a whole lot. Let's see about that. It says, the owner of a coal mining operation falsely imprisoned for fratricide. takes a drug to make him invisible, despite its side effect, gradual madness. But yeah, I like that one. Okay, number 3 was Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I should say I love these Universal monster movies. And these movies are even worse for the most part. But I'm also very interested. I don't know if I'd say I'm a fan. I guess I am a fan, but I'm very interested in that, like 1950s, 1960s, like either those type of monster run amok movies that are very science oriented, or just obviously you were seeing an explosion in independent film that was starting to happen then with the AIP movies. A lot of those like AIP Corman horror movies that are really low budget, really pretty bad. Obviously by far the best type of that movie is Carnival of Souls, which we're big fans of.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Love that movie. We might eventually do that on here. I don't know, but anyway, that isn't part of that. But I am interested in that kind of the Atomic Age horror movie, and I think that Creature from Black Lagoon is one of the better one of those. Then, of course, The Invisible Man was my number 2, which we talked. Have we talked about that at all?
Yeah, a little bit.
And then Frankenstein is my number 1, and you can speak more to that.
Yeah, I mean, I really love Frankenstein. I think that's I'd say one of the great horror movies in general, not just the Universal bunch, but that's a movie I think really holds up. And that might come off as laughable for some. Yeah. The whole opening of be warned that this
we warned you.
Yeah. Might be a little corny or hokey, but I think it really works. I think I think the movie's awesome, still great.
Yep.
And another thing is too how brief it is, but still how evocative it is at the same time.
That one, even more so than this one, really revels in its brevity in a way that is rare. That it feels about exactly the right amount of time. Every single passing moment is iconic in a way that few of these are. I think it really transcends its own genre and what it really is, and really gets to something that is far better. But yeah, that was my top 10. As far as I do want to quickly say too, one thing I want to bring up as well is, of course, there were the Val Lewton films that started being made in the 1940s. Val Lewton was a producer for RKO. A lot of these movies were made with either Jack Tourneur or Robert Wise. But I've seen some of those more recently, and those are actually really good. And I always thought that those would be good when I was growing up, because they're even more raw in some ways than these are, especially like I Walk with a Zombie, which I'm a really big fan of. That's a good movie. And Cat People is also really good. Also, The Body Snatcher, which might have my favorite, actually, Boris Karloff performance in any movie. And that movie straight up has maybe one of the scariest endings to a movie, I think, of that time period. Is actually quite memorable. But I also recommend those. If you're going to pick, actually, between these two things, I think that the Universal Monster movies have been far more influential and iconic in what they've done, but to actually be more successful horror movies in the 1940s specifically that weren't relying on World War II expressly, and the kind of legacy of these monsters at that point already, I think those are the better films, which I've seen far less of. But anyway, you have any last things to say about
No, I just think that, again, I think there's a reason why this movie ranks towards the top of all these movies. I think it holds up really well. It's very much atmospheric in the way that a lot of them are, but at the same time it has a wit that I think is inherent to the material, but Claude Rains especially pulls out through his vocal performance. So, again, I would put this towards the top of the list as well.
And we hope you enjoyed it. I know that my fandom or expertise of this is kind of manic and kind of was all over the place earlier on, but I feel like we kind of got everything we need to get. And this probably might not be the last one of these we ever do. We might end up doing some other ones.
We may very
well
do some more in the future.
Anyway.
So that's it for the very third episode of Overlapping Dialogue. This is Kyle.
And this is Levi.
And we're going to be taking a little bit of a different track.
We're not doing a Universal movie.
The next movie. The next movie we're going to be doing is from Chris Koch, and it's a 2000 survivalist, in some ways a dark Night of the Soul type of movie. In fact, it's actually a Nickelodeon movie by the name of Snow Day, starring Chevy Chase and Chris Elliott.
Chevrolet Chase.
Which I'm not sure exactly why we're doing this next. We haven't seen it in a while, but we grew up watching it a decent amount.
Yeah. Well, it's important also to mention that part of the reason we're doing this is that Kyle has I think a story for the ages, related to this movie and seeing this movie memorably not seeing this movie in theaters.
Well, yeah,
actually.
seeing some of the movie and
Yeah.
then not seeing it. And I involves a short story. I finally commemorated when in my freshman year at UNCW creative writing class I took. I actually was lucky enough to find that short story, and I'm going to read it for the next program. But we also have a lot of other things to say about the movie. We're huge fans of Chris Elliott and Get a Life, as well as his work in Something About Mary, as well as the many clips and stuff he did on Letterman. So, a random left field choice. But we want to kind of make this a left field podcast in the sense that we're just kind of bumping around between various things we're interested in.
I think it's also a good kind of reason to do this is because we're going to go off and do some other, we'll just say a little bit more serious movies, the next few
Much
that we've
more
got
dramatic
lined up.
movies.
And I think this will be, not that these other movies we've just done haven't been more serious, but they've been a little bit more fun. And those will be fun in their own way. But I think this is going to be a good kind of last hurrah before we get into some really dark stuff. But anyway,
2000 Snow Day is what we're going to be doing next. And so again, this is Kyle,
and this is Levi,
and we're actually going to end this episode with a clip from a very bizarre short film that Levi put me onto. That was, I guess, produced by Universal in the age of all these monster movies, called Boo. Do you want to say anything about introducing this?
Yeah, one thing I'll explain about this. As I said earlier, specifically in reference to the Spanish Dracula film, I think that it's a good jumping off point to talk about with this specifically is that obviously we talked about with the newspapers at the time that films weren't really seen as precious commodities at a certain point. They weren't stored very well. Very famously, there were a lot of fires in studio vaults at this time that just totally burned up nitrate film. And there's so many films that are just for other reasons too, not just that. But there's so many films of this period that are just totally lost. There's very famous ones like London After Midnight, which was a Lon Chaney Sr. film. It's probably one of the most famous lost films ever made.
And it's on the way, obviously, very famously, Magnificent Ambersons, the original cut of
that is. And there were portions of King Kong that are totally lost that were cut because they were too extreme for the time that they totally cut.
There's some things from Frank Capra's Lost Horizon, I know, that he actually willingly threw into the fire himself and said, we're not doing this anymore.
And stuff like the original, the Golem movies of that time, a lot of those kind of German Expressionist films are some of those missing. Anyway, what's important about this short film, which to explain was basically a packaged together little short film of different clips from these Universal monster movies at the time.
It's mostly Frankenstein and Dracula,
right? It's like Frankenstein, but then like Nosferatu Dracula mostly, which is very strange because that's also a German film. I don't know how they got I guess they didn't care about rights back then. I don't know, but anyway, they probably own the rights to the novel, but that notably was weird about that. But anyway, it was like basically a comedy short.
Yeah.
But most of the footage of it is most of the comedy of it's very visual, and it makes a lot of jokes about Congress and stuff at the time, which is very Depression era weird, like we hate the government at this but very weird. If you can find that, it's on YouTube.
The whole thing's on YouTube in good quality.
But we were going to put a clip of it here just to end us out. But very, very strange. So look into that if you ever have the time.
Yeah, so we're going to end this episode, our third episode on Invisible Man, with this brief little clip from this short film, Boo. So,
exclamation point.
Again, sharpen up your snow boots because we're going to Snow Day next time. So take care. God bless.
With times as tough as they are, we present our formula for the cheapest kind of amusement, nightmares. First, you eat a real lobster, not the kind they send to Congress. Then you add milk and mix in a horror story. We've all heard of the worm that turned, but this is the bookworm that turned, inside out. Of course, if you can work up a chill, it helps. And a little ptomaine poisoning will get your mind off your other troubles. And when you get that delicious feeling which is a cross between delirium tremens and the 7-year itch, you know that something will come up any minute. Oh,